Is this a great game or what? With Tim and Jeff Kurkjian. It is our spring training edition. And Dad, we are back in the basement of my house in Pennsylvania. Thank goodness, too. I missed being this close to you while recording the podcast.
I'm so happy I'm this close to you, Jeff, because we've had some technical issues. And when I'm 200 miles away from you, it terrifies me. But I am really excited about spring training, Jeff.
Yeah.
And, of course, our guest today is
Joe Maddon. Dad, when we talked about doing a spring training special episode, the first guy that came to mind for you was Joe Maddon because he's a longtime MLB manager, right? He was a minor league baseball player. And he just has an approach to the clubhouse that's so fitting for a spring training episode.
Right, and that's why spring training is so great, is it's so different than the regular season. It's not important how many games you win in spring training. It's just a matter of getting your team ready to go. So this is my 45th spring training, and one of the rites of passage is I get my baseball writer's card, and I just received it yesterday.
Let me see.
So I'm very excited.
This is fancy. So you get a new one of these every single year.
Every year. So I've been in the baseball writers for 45 years. And what number am I down to?
I was going to say 22.
Yes. When I first started, Jeff, I was number 881.
Stop it.
Yes. And now I'm down to 22. So that means only 21 people out there have been doing this longer than I have, like continuously, and still have a baseball writer card today. Ross Newhan of the LA Times, I believe, is still number one. You know, Dan Shaughnessy, Jason Stark, Peter Gammons, three of my mentors. They're all ahead of me, but 22 is pretty good. So a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, Mark Trumbo and Peter Borges, who are both on the Angels, I'm not sure exactly what year, it's not important, they really got interested in everybody's number on their card. So they saw me in the clubhouse one day, and they came up to me and said, "Can we look at your card?" And I was down to like 58, and they went, "Boy, that is really low." I've never seen a baseball player who had any interest whatsoever in anybody's number on their baseball writer's card, but it means something to me because to go from 881 down to 22 is really good.
45 years of covering spring training. And as a kid growing up, this was like always our spring break trip, is we would either end up in Florida or Arizona because we could kill two birds with one stone. We could be with Dad during a very busy time in your career, in your job, but also we get to enjoy some really awesome places. So 45 spring trainings.
Right. 1980, by the way, I had nothing to do with this, but just to show you how things have changed, the Oakland A's had 100 different players in camp. 100. So there was a guy named Scott Meyer who was a non-roster catcher. He wore number 100 in spring training. I've never seen anyone with a 3-digit number before or after, because now if you have too many, you'll maybe be over 100. Some guys are like 87A and 87B, to which we've made the joke, when you're 87B, you're not even the best number 87, you know? So, but I really target 1982 because that was my first year as a full-time beat guy. And as I've told you, Jeff, everything changes when you're the number one beat guy from your newspaper. Like, all the responsibility is on you. So 82, I'm covering the Texas Rangers for the Dallas Morning News. And I'm sure I told you the story before, Jeff, but 3 weeks into spring training, Mickey Rivers, the hilarious center fielder for the Rangers, who's making $450,000 a year, comes up to me in spring training. I've known him for 3 weeks. And he goes, "Tim, can you loan me $2,000? I said, "Mick, I'm making $12,000 a year. I don't have $2,000 to my name." So Buddy Bell, who was the star of the team, he whispered to me later, he said, "Look, everyone loves Mick, but don't ever loan him any money because you'll never get the money back." Also, Jeff, back then, and things have changed so much, in Pompano Beach, they had Municipal Stadium, which was a dinky little, rickety little, tiny little ballpark, and they had a half field right next to it. And that was the extent of Major League spring training for the Texas Rangers. They had one full-sized field, and then a half field. That's all they had. Now you look at these spring training facilities, they're all shared. They're all brand new. You get like 9 diamonds to yourself in spring training. It's unbelievable how work actually got done back then because there were so few, facilities, fields, everything else, batting cages, everything else.
Well, you look at like the Phillies in Clearwater. It's just unbelievable the amount of space they have and the amount of fields.
Right.
It's incredible.
That's a perfect example. So Ron Darling, broadcaster now with the Mets, used to play with the Rangers in 82. They traded him at the end of the 82 spring training. One of the worst trades in Major League history, not the point. So Ron recently told me that they would get their running in by running like through the trees and everything else. And he said, we all found a shortcut where you can cut through and everyone thinks you've run a mile or 2 miles. And he said, sometimes we would just sit on a bench and rest because we knew we were way ahead of because we took a shortcut. That's how things worked in 82. And a little bit later, a little off the topic, but Sid Fernandez was a pitcher for the Mets in the 80s. And they had just opened a new facility in Port St. Lucie where the Mets still train today. And now it's gigantic, sprawling, it's beautiful. But back then it was built like in the middle of a swamp, in the middle of the woods, and the players had to do their running like through the woods, like through a path through the woods. And one day, Sid Fernandez ran into a warthog who chased him out of the woods, and he comes screaming out of the woods, like terrified. There is a monster in there because a warthog had chased him out of the woods.
Do you know what the warthog's name was? Was his buddy Timon with him? Pumbaa,
you are a pig. Timon, Pumbaa. Watch that movie a million times with you.
Yep.
It was great. All right, 84, I loved it. It was so good. Mitch Williams' first spring training in Major League camp, he was with the Rangers, and he's the wildest pitcher of all time. Mitch Williams gave up more walks than hits allowed in his career. Think about that for a second. No pitcher with that many innings has ever come close to allowing more walks than hits allowed. So that first spring training, Mitch Williams is pitching to the veterans, and he throws so hard, but he's so wild. Everyone's afraid to face him. One pitch, it missed the cage, and it hit the tire that you roll the cage up. It hit the tire and went like 100 feet in the air. Then he hit Alan Bannister right in the middle of the back. This is his teammate, of course. And Buddy Bell and Larry Parrish said, we're not batting against him. He's not ready to pitch Major League batting practice. So they quit. They said, we're not hitting against him. He's going to kill us. So I asked Mitch about it later. And Mitch said, I think that was the right move. I really didn't want to kill one of my teammates in my first Major League camp. Good call. Mitch, by the way, had a brother named Bruce. And Bruce pitched professionally, not in the big leagues, but professionally. And Bruce apparently threw harder and was wilder than Mitch Williams, if it's possible.
Right.
So as Mitch once told me, he said, we'd go outside like we were like teenagers, 14, 15, 16 years old, and we'd play catch in the front yard, me and my brother Bruce. And he said, and mothers would come running out of their house, screaming at their little children, get off the street. The Williams boys are playing catch. So just to show you how unimportant wins and losses are in spring training. I think it was 84. It's not important which year, but Paul Splittorff, who's a wonderful man and a really good pitcher, was at the end of his career with the Kansas City Royals. And the Rangers, my team, are playing the Royals in a game late in spring training. And Paul Splittorff is pitching to make the club, even though he's a veteran. He's on his last legs. So Larry Parrish tells his teammates, here's what we should do. We should all make outs on purpose. That way, it'll make Paul Splittorff look really good. Then he'll make the team, and we face them the first week of the season. So we'll get to face him in a game that actually matters. So let's do that, and then we'll light him up when the regular season begins. So when people say, oh, gosh, they lost another spring training game, people don't care if you lose a spring training game. You're there not for that. You're there for other things. The rules are also so lax in spring training, Jeff. At least they used to be. You know, you could get tickets to games and people didn't even check you coming in. So one year, this is 89, I want to say, I left tickets for a family friend, Ron Petrella. Still a friend. I haven't talked to him in a long time. But Ron was a big Pirates fan, and the Orioles were playing the Pirates in a game at RFK Stadium in Washington. It's the final exhibition game. So I leave tickets for Ron. He gets there, and they don't have his tickets. And they're so embarrassed that they give him a pass, much like my pass, that can get him on the field before the game. So he's down on the field. This is a guy who's supposed to be sitting in the stands, but he's got a pass where people are telling him, you can go wherever you want with that. So he goes out on the field watching his favorite team, the Pirates, and then the game starts. This is an exhibition game, but the game begins, and Ron Petrella is in the Pirates dugout during the game. He's like sitting right next to Jim Leland, and they're looking at him, and I said, Ron, didn't they know that you weren't supposed to be there? And he goes, well, no one even asked because it was so relaxed. He said, I think they thought I was like the son of one of the owners. So he watched an entire exhibition game from the Pirates dugout, and he loves the Pirates. So I write this in the paper the next day at the Baltimore Sun because I'm the Orioles beat writer. So it goes in Oriole Notes, this little bright, funny thing about Ron Petrella. So Ron goes the next day to the real opening day, the real game at Memorial Stadium. And he's sitting next to the guy, and the guy says to him, did you see that story in the paper today about that guy who got to spend the entire game in the dugout? And Ron said, yes, that was me.
I always say, like, ignorance is bliss when it comes to this. Like, you remember that time we were at the American Girl doll store?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we were shopping in I believe it was Atlanta.
Chicago.
Oh, Chicago.
Yeah.
We were in Chicago, and it's in the mall, big glass windows separate the mall from the American Girl doll store, and Dad with my cousins, his nieces, they're all shopping, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of dollars of stuff, and Dad doesn't realize where the store ends and where the mall begins. So here they are getting their American Girl doll's hair done, and we look out. On the outside of the windows, we see Dad in the mall with thousands of dollars of American Girl doll clothes, and we're going, get back in here, you're shoplifting. And he's like, what? What's going on?
It was like $1,100 worth of American Girl doll stuff in my bag, and I did not know we had not paid for it.
And that's how he got in the dugout, because if you don't know you're doing something wrong, then you're usually innocent on it.
Good point, Jeff. So, Jeff, again, spring training is so great. Just because it's so different.
Right.
Long bus rides, especially in Florida. So one of my favorite stories is Brian Anderson used to play for the Indians, now a broadcaster for the Tampa Bay Rays. Brian's one of the funniest people in the world, but he's taking a trip from Winter Haven to Vero Beach. It's like a 3-hour ride. And he gets about an hour into it and realizes he forgot his spikes, his hat, and his glove back in Winter Haven, all right? Back then, you know, you can't just turn around, and they don't bring equipment bags with all sorts of extra stuff. So Brian Anderson told me, in full uniform, as soon as he got to Vero Beach, he had to get in a car and drive to go buy the equipment that he didn't have. So he went into a Walmart in full uniform and said, well, it's a Walmart. They have everything. They have tires. They have produce. They must have a baseball glove. So he went in there and bought a baseball glove at Walmart. It was enormous. He said it was almost as big as Greg Maddox's glove.
Right.
Greg Maddox wore the biggest glove ever. It is maybe the greatest fielding pitcher ever. But Brian Anderson said, yeah, I pitched 5 innings, and no surprise, I got 5 comebackers in a game wearing a glove that cost $28 that I bought at the Walmart like 2 hours earlier. This is what happens in spring training. And speaking of buses, years ago, you've asked me many times about my favorite nicknames in baseball.
Yeah.
There was a Rockies pitcher named David, and his nickname was Diesel. So I said, how did he get the name Diesel? So the Rockies were on a spring training trip, and the bus driver got sick, and he couldn't drive. So David Lee said, I'll drive the bus. So now he's driving the entire team in the spring training bus, having never driven a bus before. And then they're getting low on gas, so he pulls off and he announces to the entire team, "We got to stop for diesel." And that's how he got his name.
That's how he got it.
Diesel Lee. I'll never forget him just for that alone. And Alex Cora, of course, the manager of the Boston Red Sox, he used to tell me that he said I was an I-4 guy. And I said, what does that mean? This is years ago. I didn't know what that meant. He goes, I took all the trips on I-4 in Florida, which if you don't know, Jeff, the I-4 highway in Florida cuts all the way across. It's the most crowded road in the history of roads. But if you're going to take bus trips in Florida, you almost always have to go on the I-4. And Alex Cora, who for the most part was not an everyday player, so he took the trips in order to give the everyday players a day off so they didn't have to go on this monstrous road trip. He said, I only had one rule. If I'm going to take a trip like that, I need 4 at-bats when I get there because I needed to make sure that I get my work in and it's worth me driving on I-4 all that time. So, again, greatest spring training stories ever. And my favorite part, Jeff, about spring training is you get to meet your new teammates.
Right.
For the first time. So I've told you about Michael Kadire. Remember Michael Kadire? You met him at the coaches convention in January. What a great guy. So Michael Kadire is a magician. I mean, literally a magician. He can do card tricks that I saw. Now, I don't know anything about magic. I'm just telling you, I watched what he did, and I could have watched 1,000 times and not figured out what he did. So in spring training one year, Luis Castillo joins the Twins. Luis Castillo has never met Michael Kadire before, and now they're sitting right next to each other because that's where their lockers are. And Michael Kadire is the all-time best teammate, Jeff.
Right.
And when you ask, the guys on the Twins used to say, what do I need to know here? And the manager and the coaches would say, Michael Kadire, just do what he does. Act like him, and you're going to be fine. Wow. That's how great he was. But one day, Michael Kadire does a card trick for Luis Castillo. And it is so unbelievably good that Luis Castillo was afraid of Michael Kadire. How could you do that? It was like some, black magic voodoo kind of thing. And it spooked him so badly that the next day when he came into spring training, he had moved his locker across the clubhouse because he didn't want to sit next to Michael Kadire anymore.
It spooked him that much.
Yeah, and that's what can happen. So Michael Kadire also told me a story about Jeremy Guthrie, who's one of my favorite people. He used to ride his bike everywhere. Okay, he used to ride his bike to the ballpark during the regular season, but always in spring training. So one day, Jeremy Guthrie, pitching for the Rockies, pitches a game. Then he gets on his bicycle in full uniform. And according to Michael Kadire, he put his glove on the handlebars, just like we did, Jeff, when we were kids.
The Sandlot,
And that's exactly what Michael Kadire said. It was like a scene out of the Sandlot.
Way.
Guy pitched 5 innings in an exhibition game, and then he drove his bike back to the facility in full uniform with his glove on the handlebars. I just love it. Got to be careful with this one, Jeff, okay? So the same Twins team that Michael Kadire was on, they got a new player from Japan. His name is Nishioka, okay? So he comes to camp, and everyone is going to try to get used to, dealing with a guy who's from another country. They want to make him feel welcome.
And was it a little less common at this time
far
than it
less.
is like today? I mean, now you got
so many Japanese players today, and they all speak some form of English, but apparently Nishioka didn't speak English. So they go to Denard Span, who's one of the best guys in the game, and they tell the Twins teammates tell Denard Span, you need to go over and introduce yourself to Nishioka and welcome him to the team. So Denard says, okay, I will, of course, I want to welcome him to the team. So he goes over to the locker of the guy that he thinks is Nishioka.
Oh, no.
Okay? But it's not Nishioka. So Denard Span very respectfully says, my name is Denard Span. I play center field for the Twins. I'm your new teammate. It is really nice to meet you. And he said, do you speak English? And the guy who he thought was Nishioka's name was Ray Chang. And Ray Chang goes, of course I speak English. I'm from Kansas City. So the entire clubhouse burst into tears because they got that one all mixed up between Nishioka and Ray Chang. I hope no one takes offense to that because everyone in the room howled with laughter. But again, Jeff, the big difference in spring training is just how much more stuff there is to use. I mean, there are the equipment that we have that, measures launch angle and spin rate. It's absolutely amazing. And as Rich Donnelly, who did a million spring trainings, did the Washington Senators in the late 60s when I was a Senators fan, was with the Rangers in 82 when I first got there. So I got to know Rich well. He just said, I just can't see Ted Williams in spring training running around with a parachute on his back because that's what guys do every once in a while. And he said, and I just can't see Babe Ruth jumping over a bunch of orange cones, which is what we do. To me, that just shows you how much spring training has changed. But the bottom line is, Jeff, spring training is still the best time of year. My favorite time of year. Nobody's lost any games yet. All the rookies look great. All the veterans look good. They haven't gotten hurt yet. Everyone's in a great mood. The weather's here. Spring's coming. Warm weather. It's the greatest time ever, whether it's Babe Ruth days or days today. I can't wait to get to spring training.
Yeah, those are great memories of spring training for you. I have a couple that I wrote down and I wanted to share. First of all, one of the first ones I really remember was being in Arizona when your alma mater, University of Maryland, with Steve Blake and
Juan Dixon.
Juan Dixon was on that team. They won the national championship while we were in Arizona. And I remember watching the game with you on the tiny
Mom and Kelly in our hotel room. And Juan Dixon made that amazing three with plenty of time left on the shot clock, broke the game wide open, and we won the national championship. So cool.
This episode being recorded on President's Day to be released the day after President's Day, and you've done a Best of All Tim for the President's team, right? All President's team?
Yeah, and you could come up with a team that's better, bigger than mine. It's not that hard to do. The only rule is you have to use one president. You can't use 4 Kennedys or 4 Washingtons. You have to use
when
20,
you use one, it's done.
Right, 25 different names. So our catchers are Gary Carter, Hall of Famer, and Russ Nixon, love that. Von Hayes and Reggie Jefferson are our first baseman. Got to have a Jefferson in there. The third baseman is John Kennedy. There was actually a third baseman.
Really?
I remember him growing up named John Kennedy. So he's got first and last name. We love that. Ron Washington is the shortstop. He played on the Orioles when I covered them. And when Cal Ripken's consecutive inning streak ended, it was ended when they put Ron Washington in the game in 1987 in Toronto. I covered that game.
Wow.
That was the night that the Blue Jays hit 10 homers in one game. No team's ever done that before or after.
Wow.
And in the 8th inning of that game, they took Cal Ripken out of the game in the 8th inning, which was an even bigger story because a consecutive inning streak, which had lasted 3 years. He didn't miss an inning for 3 years.
Right.
That came to an end also. So Ron Washington is the shortstop. Outfield is Craig Monroe and Lou Clinton. Center fielder is Willie Wilson. Outfielders are Michael Taylor and Brian Buchanan.
Excellent job.
Whitey Ford is our primary pitcher. Madison Bumgarner. I used all last names, but I made an exception because Madison Bumgarner is one of the great pitchers of our era. By the way, James Madison, I believe, was our shortest president, which I think he was short. I'm sure he was shorter than me. And I was told, not like I know anything about presidential history, that he used to love to stand next to George Washington because George Washington made him feel bigger because he was standing next to George Washington, who was such a big man. It would make me feel smaller. Right, but he felt the power of George Washington, so he loved hanging around with him. Lefty Tyler, Reggie Cleveland.
Great.
Babe Adams. 2 Adams, of course. And Mudcat Grant. And speaking of relievers, these are my two favorites. Pierce Johnson. Double.
Franklin Pierce,
right.
Andrew Johnson,
right.
or Lyndon Johnson.
Right. And Grant Jackson. Double.
Wow.
Right.
Extra points.
Right. So that's important. J.J. Hoover didn't pitch very long in the big leagues. Brad Lincoln. You cannot have an all-presidential team without Lincoln. And let's see how well you remember who shares a birthday with Abraham Lincoln. He was one of our 35 guests on the podcast.
Todd Frazier. Which I don't know why you brought that up on that episode, and you're fascinated by that. Right. I think it's great.
Herb Scoren 10 years ago, Todd Frazier played for the Yankees.
Todd Frazier traded pins with 12-year-olds.
I love it, right. Jermaine Van Buren is our last reliever, and even though this is not a president, he belongs on the all-presidential team because I covered him, Len Whitehouse. What a perfect name for the last guy on our 25-man all-presidential team.
Dad, I'm really looking forward to, because this is our spring training episode, and we've got an incredible former manager, Major League Baseball manager of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, Joe Maddon's going to be joining us.
And Joe is going to tell us a bunch of stories about what we were just talking about, Jeff, how different spring training is, how laid back, even though you got to get your work done, how laid back and how different spring training is. And Joe just embraced how important it was to keep it lively in those 6 weeks of spring training. Keep it fun, because pretty soon the unbelievable grind of 162 games is going to start. So I can't wait for everyone to hear some of Joe Maddon's stories.
Joe Maddon joins Is This a Great Game or What? Coming up next.
Welcome back to Is This a Great Game or What? Our guest today for the spring training episode is our pal Joe Maddon, former minor league baseball player, former really good high school quarterback, and of course, a major league coach and manager for a million years. Joe, this is my son, Jeff. Welcome to the podcast.
I cannot be more honored to meet Jeff for the first time. We have a common friend, actually, and his therapist is my nephew, Michael, of all things. And it's always great to be with you. Tim, you've done so many wonderful things for us in Hazleton with the Hazleton Integration Project, which is really still going wonderfully. So seeing you both on the same screen is pretty cool.
Right. Well, Joe, we're going to start off with spring training. A couple years you lived in your mobile home, correct? Mm-hmm. And would you please tell Jeff the name of the mobile home? You gave it a special name, did you not?
It was the Cousin Eddie. You remember Christmas Vacation? And actually I had a great decal made up of when he's Cousin Eddie standing by the grate, the sewer grate, holding the hose from the sewage system of the RV into the sewage system. And that was the decal. And I had it on the side of the RV. So you're driving down the highway and people say the Cousin Eddie with the silhouette of Quaid standing there with the hose into the sewer. It was so good. I got so many compliments about it, but there was different iterations too. I had about three. I think it was like 3 Cousin Eddies, 1, 2, and 3. Might have been a 4th, but I no longer have a Cousin Eddie. It just got to the point where they were very difficult to maintain, and storage is also a concern. But anyway, wonderful place to live in spring trainings all the time, and they were great for spring training.
Yeah, but Joe, you could have stayed in a really cool hotel. You could have gotten a house. Instead, what was the number one reason behind having your own mobile home?
I'll tell you one thing. When you do an RV, mobile home, RV, whatever, you feel like it's your own. You're on the road, but you're not. So you feel very comfortable. You pack it up when you leave. A lot of the stuff is familiar. You get to where you're going, and you're not taking suitcases in and out of hotels. You're not walking through a lobby. And quite frankly, I have no problem greeting the public, but there's an isolationism to this that's also kind of neat at that time of the year. So I'm telling you, you get a cool, this is a 45-footer. This is a bus. So when you get one that large, it's like you are at home. You took your home on the road, parked it, you live, and then afterwards, of course, my son-in-law, Theo, Sarah's husband, would drive it back from Arizona back to Tampa when I had it out in Arizona. But it is, the best way for those that are on the fence, It's like you're living in your own place as opposed to something a little bit more sterile.
Thank you, Joe, for joining this podcast. Seriously. And when we were talking about having somebody, you're mentioning living out of Cousin Eddie in spring training. When when we were talking about doing a spring training episode, this is our second season ever of the podcast. He said, well, we have to get Joe Maddon. We just have to, because of the things he would do during spring training, the fun he would have. Can you take us back to those days of maybe some of the more fun things you did with your players or your teams to kind of, it's a long season. Baseball is a long year. And so what were some antics or some fun you had during spring training with your teams?
Well, it all, it evolved. It started with the Rays, of course. It even goes back to instructionally with the Angels. Nobody ever ceased different things that you do in the minor leagues. We used to do this thing where Jeter Hines would be the Mateo, the god of wood. And we would have to get into a slump. So we would get all the bats out into the middle of the field, one of the fields at Gene Autry Park. And then Alan Sigwart, who then became the field superintendent at Joe Robbie Stadium, he'd bring him out in one of those little dump things, the payloader, and it would be up in this kind of position, holding it up, and Jeter would be inside this thing. In the meantime, we get all the bats together. I don't mean to gross people out, but in the morning it would be like spit cans all over the locker room, and you were permitted to spit in these things, and then Jeter would consolidate it, and then he'd get out there with like Rambo kind of stuff, like the knife in his mouth, paint all over himself, coming out of a payloader, and then right in the middle of field number 3, Alan would lower it, Jeter would fall out, he'd start chanting, and then the last thing he'd do, he would gulp down this mixture that we all want. I don't mean to get you guys sick, but it was like hysterical to the point where Doug Rader had him fly to Baltimore one time when they were in a slump just to do their bats there. So he was Mateo, the god of wood. That's kind of how it started. And I used to videotape it. Now, video's fine. Audio is really what makes you, because, the guys are kind of gagging and stuff. So this was that's probably one of the funnest things I've ever seen done to do that. And then you go beyond that. Let's go with the Cubs. You guys heard of Tim Bussey?
Of course.
Yeah, Bussey, every team should have a Tim Buss. Invaluable. Bussey would have his meeting in the morning before we would stretch in spring training. We'd get in a circle right outside of Sloan there, out in our little practice warm-up facility, and they would all get in a big circle. And he'd go with his ball bag. And he'd start complaining to the biggest stars about something stupid he overheard them say, and he would find them something in front of everybody, and it would just be uproarious. But the one day he had this idea with a paintball gun, and so we went out behind the batting cages where the press could not necessarily see us, and I know Hector Rondon had one, maybe somebody else, but Bussey started at the one end of the of the batting tunnels and ran to the other end, and we did video this. And as he's running down there, I think he had a helmet on and goggles, but guys are shooting him with a paintball gun, and then you play it back in slow motion, and you can see the fat, just like you see in slow motion, with just the jelly kind of a roll, and all the way down there, and then Bussy would finally get to the other end, and then he'd come back. So we would shoot him with the paintball gun in front of everybody. We brought bears down from bear country, northern Arizona. There's a farm up there, whatever you want to call it. We brought little cubs down, and the guys would frolic with the cubs on the field. Listen, it was never ending with the Rays, and also with the Angels. We had a golf event. We brought the golf clubs out. Raheem Morris was there the one time. He was the head coach of the Bucks, and then of course now with the Falcons, we'd have long drive over fields and BJ Upton. Oh my God, you got to see that in person. And then with the Angels, we had closest to the pin. But it just the camaraderie impact is incredible. The laughter, the fun, the giggle, whatever. There's enough pressure applied to these guys daily that we don't have to apply more from a staff. So I always wanted to hit the pressure relief valve as well as we possibly could and understand. And I think sometimes it's getting contorted now. It is a game. It's a game. And these guys should have fun. And if you treat them as such, you could end up going to several World Series and winning them.
Joe, didn't you used to start workouts with the Angels when you were a coach there with golf balls into the butte? Is that right? You, Mickey Hatcher?
Well, that was Mickey Hatcher. Mickey Hatcher. Oh, my God. Hatch could really drive a golf ball. So we come out the back door there right field of the main field at the Buttes, and the Buttes are in left center. I mean, I couldn't reach them, but Mickey would get out there, man. He'd tee that sucker up, and there'd be like delivery trucks and stuff out there, and I think, oh my God. But he would lose it over the wall, and it would start ricocheting off bricks and trucks and all this. And people had no idea where these golf balls were coming from. If you don't know Mickey Hatcher, Mickey, the way I could describe Mickey, I love, he was so passionate. When he'd make an argument in a meeting, the only way to stop him is when he ran out of breath. He'd run out of breath, and that would end his point. And it was always hysterical. Mickey Hatcher is one of my favorite coaches, teammates of all time. And yes, he could really drive a golf ball, not only far, but incredibly straight.
Right. Joe, I remember the famous one Mike Scioscia told me. You were there when they brought in an ostrich. Is that right?
Yeah.
Would you tell us that story when they brought an ostrich into the clubhouse?
Yeah, Scioscia was the best at this. And I think he might have got some of it from Tommy, but yeah, during spring training, we'd all gather in the morning in a circle in the clubhouse, and it's like claustrophobic. It's so small. And Scioscia would just ramble, and he would pick on guys to do different things, and primarily rookies. One guy said he could play the piano, so next day there's a piano in the middle of the clubhouse. Dude's got to get up there and play the piano, as an example. Ramon Ortiz says, in the Dominican, I could catch fish with my bare hands in the wintertime. So the next day we had a wading pool with live fish in the clubhouse. And Ramon was out there grabbing fish out of a wading pool, whatever. But the big one you're talking about was the Ostrich Festival. It was being held, I think it was in Chandler. And Jared Washburn, who's game, I love Wash. So he assigns Wash to go down there and was about to get information and photographs or pictures or T-shirts, whatever, and report back the next day. And the next day, we're doing the meeting, and all of a sudden, Wash calls timeout, and the handler walks in, and then behind him is an ostrich. And really, in person, these suckers are really tall. And that's when, and again, Ramon Ortiz, love Ramon Ortiz, sincerely, jumps out of his chair, gets on top of the lockers, and starts screaming, that's the biggest chicken I've ever seen. And it was like freaked out by the whole thing. So we did. I mean, we took it to, listen, Angels win in 2002, Rays win in 2008. We don't go all the way, but we get there. And then the Cubbies in 16. I'm telling you, man, a big part of our success was the humor attached to it and the fact that we kept guys loose. We did different things, even to the point with the playoffs with the Cubs in 16 going to the series. When we had an off day at home, we would serve breakfast on the field. So the guys are at the batting cage, taking their BP, and I'd have those trays set up in the back, those silver trays with the little burners underneath. So the guy could go get his breakfast in between swings, during the playoffs on Wrigley Field. It's weird, things like this. Everybody wants to look at more video, break data down. They want to do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, man, these guys have to be loose and their brains have to work in the moment and they have to be able to breathe. And whatever you can do to permit them to breathe in the moment, I'll take it.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's so important, Joe. And we've had Mike Scioscia on the show. Like we've had other managers. We had Tito Francona on the show. So, and there's one commonality I find is exactly what you're saying. Yes, there is data. Yes, there is numbers, but there's an unattainable statistic we can't get, which is right in here is how is he feeling? How loose is this guy? And I think that's really, really special. And it starts in spring training.
Of course it does. You have to set the tone. I only had 3 meetings during the course of a baseball season. I was not into meetings at all. I think they're overblown. They're pretty much, whoever's holding an anger meeting during the course of the year is pretty much doing it for his own benefit. It's him getting something off his chest so that he may be able to tell others that, I got him. I got in front of them. I got really upset. I told him what's what, right? For me, it's one meeting in the beginning of the year, you set the tone. And this is exactly who we are. We lay it out very clearly, specifically. This is how we're going to do it, how we're going to work, what our goals are, how we're going to attain that. We're going to remain flexible, et cetera. Just talk straight up. And then here comes the All-Star break. I used to do it after the All-Star break, but then I figured right before the All-Star break was a better time to do it because it permitted guys to think about what you were thinking about at that time. I would normally rehash spring training and then try to fill in, okay, we've met these goals, we have not met these goals, these are some things we have to pay more attention to post, et cetera, et cetera. And we were normally in pretty good shape. all the teams I've had at that time. And then the next meeting would be before the first playoff game. And most of the time we were in the playoffs. Sometimes it was just the end of the season. But before the first playoff game, I would want another meeting. Again, rehash the first meeting, second meeting. Now we're here. And the primary objective at that point was, you know what I want you guys to change right now as we're going to this first playoff game? Absolutely nothing. We played the game the same on March 15th, July 15th, August 15th, and now, okay, September 5th or November 3rd or 4th, whatever. I don't want us to play any different game. I want us to keep playing the same game of baseball. And that's what I try to convince them, that there's no more, I don't want to attach more weight to any specific day. I would frustrate the press a lot of times when it's a pretty big game. You know what? They're all big games. And I don't want us to change our attitude or our methods based on the perception that this one weighs more than the other. So that was all part of the planning from spring training, midseason, first playoff game. Then, of course, if you had to say goodbye in a way that because we lost, of course, you did that. But there was a couple celebrations that were pretty cool.
Joe, let's go back to the Angels one more time. I'm going to be careful about this, but you remember when Scott Spezio was assigned a word, and the word was erudite? Do you remember what happened? Because I wasn't there, but I remembered what happened. Do you remember?
You'd have to jog me on that one because, I mean, I love Scott Spezio, by the way.
One of the great guys ever and a World Series hero. But
absolutely,
if you remember,
no question.
He got erudite mixed up with hermaphrodite. And now...
Well, that makes sense. I'm sure I have done the same thing without even realizing it.
So there he goes, Jeff. He goes in front of the team to explain what this word means, and he's got the wrong word. And like everyone in the room is howling with laughter because of what it was. Oh, boy.
No, we did that. We did all kinds of fun stuff. I'm telling you, man, I would cry. One of the best was when Rob Quinlan assigned Quinlan to the medieval festival out there. I can't remember exactly what they call it. So Quinlan's funny. Q went to the University of Minnesota. Q and I would hang out a little bit. He was a player, I was a coach. But anyway, Q goes to this thing, and he's a reporter. And he stands there with this microphone, and he's doing his gig. But every scene that he did would be a big fat guy with the number 14 Angels jersey walking behind the shot with Sosha on his back, right? Hey, this is Rob Quinlan reporting from the medieval festival here, and we're here at the turkey leg thing, whatever. And all of a sudden, big fat guy goes walking by, 14 on his back, Sosha. So I mean, I am crying during this whole probably a 5-minute gig, and it ends up two things that were great. Quinlan's talking, and behind him is number 14 Sosha, with his back to the camera, and he gets a turkey leg, and he just like you can imagine. Takes it right down his gullet from behind. Guys are dying. And the last one, he's on this rocking horse that had to be at least 10, 15 feet tall. He's rocking on this with a turkey leg in his hand and number 14 Sosha on his back as Rob Quinlan decides to say, this is Rob reporting from the medieval festival here out in the farthest point out there in the Eastern Valley. God, I was crying. I mean, I couldn't stop. I mean, he's laughing so hard I was crying. But that was what we did, and it's you're asking players to go outside their comfort zone, and that is so important in regards to not being blown up by heavy moments or fast moments or World Series moments. You always got to. The more you walk outside of your comfort zone, because the great line is that success lies on the other side of fear. That's what you have to get beyond your fears. We all have them. And so the more you could put yourself in an uncomfortable moment, the more you diminish your fears, which then to me permits you to react in a situation with an anticipation of good and not a fear of doing something bad. Right. I think it's all interconnected.
Right. But tell us the story when you were with the Rays and you were doing a base running drill and Carlos Pena made a mistake in the base running drill. It was a minor mistake, but you corrected him. And then I know the story, Joe, but it'll be way better if you tell it. Do you remember his response when you told him you got this wrong? What he responded by?
I'm not
All
going to
right,
lie to you. I don't remember. I do remember doing all this, but I need you need to jog me a little bit.
Joe. My memory is too good. By the way, it is my
Please
greatest
go.
curse. Also, all right,
Joe, for the
he-
record, the amount of times in 1 year of Is This a Great Game or What that he has started this and guests have had to say, Tim, you're going to have to help me here. At stories he wasn't even there for.
Right.
I
No,
wasn't.
listen, I get it.
It
is a curse.
I'm
It's a curse.
clapping, Dad, because it's an incredible memory you do have.
All right,
That's
Joe. Your first baseman, Carlos Pena, quoted Martin Luther King. Do you
Okay, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
explain
Yes.
what happened roughly that day when he made a mistake on the bases and gave you his answer?
It was first to third. I think it was the
Right.
first to third drill. Was that correct? It was the first to
Exactly.
third drill. And please tell me the quote so I could understood it
I
completely.
can't remember the exact
Okay.
quote, but your point, you got him
Yeah.
off the hook because of
Right.
his reasoning.
Right, exactly. Well, Carlos always is going to have a good reason. I mean, my God, I love this man. I mean, he comes to us from Detroit, I think, at that time. Andrew calls me in the off season, and what do you think about Carlos Pena? He says, well, I've always been a big fan of this guy. He's got huge power, whatever. And then he comes to that camp, the first camp with us, and we're ready to keep Norton, the third baseman, first baseman, could really hit. And Carlos comes in my office and says, no, I'm supposed to be here. You guys are making a mistake. I've already seen it. No, this is wrong. Then we're playing our last exhibition game that day, and Norton gets hurt. He gets hurt. And all of a sudden, who's on the roster? 46 home runs later, Carlos Pena. But Carlos is so bright. He made that, whatever the mistake was, going first to third, I would imagine he did not hit the inside of the bag, nor did he probably snap his head to the next base. Those are the things that would really be emphasizing at that point, first to third, reading your keys properly. Did you look behind you? Did the right fielder before you started? Did the center fielder move laterally? I mean, all these different things I would discuss. So he would suck it up and take it, and then only he could come back to me with Martin Luther King, and at that point I just got to shut up. I mean, it's like, you're right. Okay, I accept this. And I wish I could remember the exact quote. I got a dream. I don't even know what he talked about at that point. Maybe he had the dream like I was talking about. He was supposed to be on the team when I said he wasn't for Norton. So anyway, Los, the best. Los, I'm so happy for his success. But I love when I get those guys that really kind of bright, and he's very bright. And then he would throw stuff at me, man. And he would always corner me, would start talking about different things. And it was the best. But you're absolutely right, and I do remember that specifically.
Joe, I want to talk to you about the 2016 Chicago Cubs, and hopefully my dad's okay. Little background. In 2016, I was a morning radio host in Cleveland, Ohio. It was my first job out of college. And naturally, as my dad taught me, it's so important to support the teams of the city you're living in. And so I quickly
100%.
embraced the then Cleveland Indians. You had Terry Francona, you had Francisco Lindor. It was a great team, right? And then, of course, we get to the World Series, and it's two storied franchises, two storied droughts. Obviously, the Cubs make the Indians drought at the time look like nothing. But
Right.
Game 7, I was standing room only. I just had to be in the stadium. And we talked to David Ross, who had a great, amazing home run in that. And we talked to him a little bit about how Chicago embraced him kind of forever now. For you, being solidified in Chicago allure, so to speak, how cool is that for you to kind of have that notch on your belt? I knew you're too humble to admit anything other than that, but that must be pretty awesome.
I love going back to Chicago, and I love going back to Chicago because of the people. That fan base is extraordinary. I mean, I knew that. Let me backtrack a little bit, digress. I knew nothing about that. The Cubs and the lure before I was an American leaguer. I had never even been to Wrigley Field before. The Rays played there for the first time in 2014. That's the first time I went there. Saw it on TV. When I got there, I ran into the clubhouse, put my backpack down, and ran right down to the bench because I had to see it with my own eyes. And I was not disappointed. That was how it began. And for me, I lived downtown. I had to live downtown. I wanted to feel it. I'd walk around and go for my breakfast joint in the morning, whatever. I'd go for my bike ride on Lakeshore there. Tremendous. But you'd always, people would stop and talk to you. And all they wanted to do was stop and talk to you. There was not, they didn't want an autograph. They didn't want a photograph. They just wanted to talk Cubs, how much they appreciate. It's kind of like my hometown. I've always said this. Hazleton's like a microcosm of this large city of Chicago, which is just a bunch of neighborhoods, a big group of neighborhoods. So anyway, I felt very comfortable there, and I felt very at ease with the people there because I knew these people. I'm Italian Polish, a lot of that happening there, right? And so when I looked in their faces, the conversations, they made me feel very accepted. And I was in a big city, but didn't feel like it. And that's it. When I go back there, I've done different gigs back there. Yeah, you walk in a hotel, you walk in a restaurant, whatever, still. And I did something at Crawley's Cub Cave, they call it, or something. It's out in the suburbs a couple years ago. I mean, 400, 500 people in the guy's backyard with a tent, huge. And then you go into his house and he's got like this altar to the Cubs, this shrine to the Cubs. It's sincere. It's amazing. It's the most fortunate part of my baseball career that I was given that opportunity to be there at that time. And, for me, Chicago, the city, the people, I think for me, if I could live there, I would live there if the weather was so bad. But I love that place that much, and I love going back there.
Joe, we called it the Kurkjian World Series because at the time my sister was living in Chicago and I was living in Cleveland, and I made a bet on Baseball Tonight that whoever won the series would have to have the other person pay for their flight back home to see our parents for Christmas. So David Ross didn't seem too open to helping me out with that. It's been a couple years, but I just, you just kind of screwed me out of a couple $100. I just wanted to let you know now.
Well, you were just flying back to Maryland, right?
Yeah, it was a quick trip.
Yeah, I don't feel so bad for you.
Yeah, that was a historic year and pretty incredible. And Chicago fan base is just unbelievable. So to hear that you're so connected and so solidified in that history is amazing.
Right. Joe, back to the Rays. When you had Stephen Vogt, the manager of the year in the American League this year, and he was one of your players, he routinely would imitate you in spring training. Yeah. Can you tell us what that was like?
He lampooned me. He's the best. First of all, he was not supposed to ever be a big league player, according to the front offices and the scouting department. But the guy can hit. He can absolutely hit. So he kept hitting his way up, up, up. And then we brought him over to a big league game, and he was so entertaining, the guys wanted him back again. And we would put him in the circle in the morning like we do, and then he would entertain the whole group. Gets to the point where he finally gets to know me well enough that we had like a talent show that first year. That was 2008 at Port Charlotte. Talent show was tremendous. Percival was a judge. Cliff Floyd's a judge. All these dudes are the judge. And here comes Voter. This is out in the outfield on that deck. He comes out on his bicycle, which I did all the time, with dressed up like me, with glasses like me, and with a fungo. He gets off the bike, and I always prop the fungo underneath my leg. Cookie Rojas taught me how to do that. So he stands there like me and just starts extemporaneously saying a lot of big words, not making any sense whatsoever, being me. And the place howled. Voter is, he's so contagious. He's a pathogen. He's contagious. And when he got there, I knew, regardless of what he knows or doesn't know about managing a baseball team, him alone is going to make up for that as he plays catch up. He is that appealing to a wide variety of people. He just is. So doesn't surprise me. I love the way him and Carl got on. Carl Wilson, another guy, Carl the Truth. Carl used to have my picture underneath the bill of his cap when he pitched in Edmonton. Anytime I went in there as a roving instructor, the Truth would pitch well. So, I mean, to this day, for a long time, he kept my picture underneath his hat, under his bill. So when I see him sitting there with Voter, it's kind of a cool gig. It makes me feel pretty good about it. And I really believe Voter, as he understands the game better from the manager's seat, combining that with his talents as an individual, as a human, his ability to relate to people, it's going to get pretty special.
But Joe, you do use a lot of big words because you are a
Unintentionally.
tremendously educated from Lafayette, and you read more books than the average person could ever dream of reading. How important are words to you, not just as a manager and a baseball guy, but as a person?
Well, I think it was Twain that said, and Mark Twain said a lot of cool stuff. The difference between the right word and the wrong word is like the difference between lightning and the lightning bug, something along those lines, right? And that really synopsizes the whole thing. I mean, yes, starting 1974, 5, whatever that was. I told you this story. It's in our book of Joe. Me and Tommy Verducci. Uncle Chuck gave me Centennial by James Michener. Now, Michener, of course, he could not have researched all of that, but Michener's books were normally right around 1,000 pages. I couldn't put it down. And it really starts about plate tectonics, how animals move from Russia, Asia, over the Bering Sea Strait, which was frozen. They'd come over North America, end up in Colorado. And I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked at that particular juncture. So I read so many Michener books from that moment on. Favorite author, Pat Conroy, probably, because I just don't know. I don't know. I've read anybody that could put a sentence together better or more interestingly than Pat Conroy can do. I started with Beach Music, Leon Uris, Exodus, The Hodge. Keep moving forward. The popular ones, Grisham, all those guys. Greg Isle, some great stuff. Spandau Phoenix, all these books. I love fiction, but I love educational fiction. Stuff that was rooted in fact also. And, of course, I read Joe Namath stuff because I'm a Namath guy. But I'm telling you, Timmy, I used to read, I swear to you, at least 2 books a month, probably like real books. Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth, World Without End, all these Ken Follett stuff. Another thing, The Fall of Giants, the last thing he did, the trilogy, unbelievably great. So, yes, my interest in words and reading was born of Uncle Chuck. My Uncle Chuck, that one day told me, read this. And then from that, it moved into The Source, the Caribbean, all these different Michener books, and The Drifters. That's the one that really made my mind jump. I just so wanted to go to Europe and travel and be young and travel and not worry about, where's the next buck coming from. All these guys did that for me. And I think it's infiltrated my craft as a manager and what I do as a manager because I see things differently. I understand differently. And I think that was a gift that Uncle Chuck gave to me.
Joe, I've heard so many amazing stories of the work you've done in your hometown of Hazleton, which currently from where I am in beautiful Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, is only like 90 minutes away. So we're not too far from each other. And you mentioned at the top of the show, your nephew is my physical therapist, Mike, who I run into at the local Chinese food restaurant because we live about 6 minutes away from each other. And Dad, I joked about this before we hit record. On our first session, I was having some really bad plantar fasciitis. We basically didn't talk about my foot the entire time. We just talked about Joe and you, Dad, and that connection and baseball, which I think is just so beautiful that when you find a connection, a mutual connection in baseball. But back to Hazleton. My dad has been a part of some amazing events that you've done. I know that Cal Ripken Jr. has been a part of it. Take us to what that means to you, what that event is, and what it benefits, because I know it's really important to you.
Yeah, I'll synopsize again here. Give you the cliff notes. This began in 2010. I went back home for Christmas and was really upset. I grew up in the best town in the world ever to grow up in as a kid, and it no longer was that. It was dark. There was fear all over the city. There was this rift between the incoming Hispanic community versus the existing Anglo community, and it wasn't going to go anywhere good positively in the near future. It wasn't going to happen. And I flew back to California thinking to myself, I got to do something. Got to do something here. This is not going to work. Playing in baseball, being in baseball, so many Hispanic members, and just in general terms, we've been able to expand our horizons internationally just by the people that we meet. So I get back and I'm upset. So I call my cousin, Bob and Elaine, and it started with the thought. I mean, we needed to do something because I saw it as the people that I grew up with are pushing these people away. And I'm saying, no, we have to draw them in because they're the ones that are going to save our city. The city was pretty much, you talk about Rust Belt. There was nothing going on. there was no real industry. There's some warehousing and all that kind of stuff. Coal was no longer king as it had been. So these guys are coming in. They're coming in with families, and they're looking for the American dream. Inexpensive housing, good schools, much better schools, and opportunity for work, because Interstate 80 and 81 meet right there. There's all these warehousing stuff going on out there with like low skill, but good paying jobs and an opportunity to get your feet on the ground. So these were the perfect people to get us going. So how do you do this? How do you make this work? So I went to a daycare center after church on a Sunday. It was a Hispanic daycare center, and the lady's name was Yorka. And I'm watching this whole thing unfold, and I'm seeing like low tables with adults' knees sitting above and potluck on the table. I'm seeing kids running everywhere. Everything's out of control. It's like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And I thought to myself, wow, this is exactly what my house used to look like back in the 60s and pretty much the 60s. And I thought at that point, we are pushing this away, and this is exactly who we were and what we need. So that was how it was born. And then we eventually started like with an event to raise money. It was Yogi Bear and Don Zimmer at Lobitz's Catering Hall. That's how it began. And all of a sudden we're raising some bucks, and then Bob starts writing grants. And then eventually we buy MPB school, which is a former elementary, junior high school, 25 classrooms, full cafeteria, full gymnasium that the Ripkins provided money to put an all-purpose floor on that gym that still is jammed every day there. And then you got adult education, you got after-school education, and now we're winning national awards for, pretty much setting an example. This is how to do this thing.
You started with Yogi Berra, and then you upgraded to bringing my dad in.
That's right.
Big upgrade.
Very good.
All right.
Outstanding.
Enough. Look,
That's right.
I'm telling you, one of the highlights of my career was one night in Hazleton. I was the moderator, and Joe and Cal Ripken spoke for an hour. And all I did was ask one question, and then the rest of the hour was a back and forth between Cal Ripken and Joe Maddon. And when it was over, I had to tell everyone in the crowd, 100 people who paid $1,000 each, that you have just been let in on some of the greatest inside baseball that I have ever heard. Joe, do you remember that back and forth you had with Cal Jr.? It was fascinating.
Absolutely. And I do remember pointing out the fact that he used to call pitches from shortstop. And I was driving me nuts to try to figure out his different signs. When I first caught on to it, I was coaching first base. So that would have been 1995. Yes, when I first caught on to it. So I'm watching all these different things. He would put his arms over his head. He'd bite the string on his glove. He would kick his foot one way or the other. He would look right or he would look left. And, Hoyles is catching, and I'm trying to figure out. There's times I thought I got a couple pitches, or I figured him out for a half inning or whatever, but then he would blow up the whole, whatever the key was. But I found that very interesting that Cal would call pitches from shortstop. So we talked about that. He didn't deny it. That was not denied.
It was tremendous. Jeff, another night that I was in Hazleton, Bill Murray showed up.
Yeah,
and help me with this, Joe. Joe Namath came to one of those, correct?
Oh, yeah,
Tell us about Bill Murray and Joe Namath separately going to Hazleton.
Yeah, this will, I can't remember where I was at exactly, but Bill Murray texted me and invited me to a gig in New York City. And I truly had something else going on. And then I said, but next week I have this thing going on in Hazleton at the Valley Country Club. I'd love for you to attend. It'd be, whatever, big, great. Can you possibly do that? He said, maybe. And by saying maybe, I said, okay. This is probably going to happen. He dropped a big maybe on us. Then all of a sudden at 6 p.m., right about 6, him and his entourage, the door's open. Here comes Bill Murray and his entourage into the Valley Country Club. And of course, he goes and sees my mom, Beanie, takes pictures with Beanie. And of course, all my cousins started gathering around him. But he was fabulous. He was there for a couple hours. He had a great time, and he was obviously the hit of the night, but obviously that got started with the thing with the Cubs, and I used to visit with them out there, and God, he was great. And so he did. That started with him asking me, and I really couldn't make it, but then he shows up 2 hours away, drives over for the night, and then drives back to New York City. That's how that happened. And Namath, I've always been a Namath fan, so I can't remember the exact spring training with Rick Vaughn. I started out talking about different things. I started out my coaches meeting at Port Charlotte with this. I didn't talk about the game. Whatever. I says, first of all, I have one edict request, whatever you want to call it, for this camp. Joe Namath has to show up at our camp at some point this year. That was it. And I empowered Chico. Chico Fernandez was our video guy. Well, I also called him my concierge. This is for the concierge. You need to get Namath here somehow. I don't care when. We got to see Joe Namath in camp this year. Okay? Then eventually that gets turned over to Rick Vaughn, who was our media guy. And eventually we go down and play the Cardinals or the Marlins in Jupiter. And who shows up but Joe? Joe shows up, and he's with us for an entire game in the dugout, in uniform, just shirt and hat. And we talked the whole game, and we hit it off so well. So then eventually I asked if he would come to one of our events. It was downtown Hazleton, really cool building, one of our more elaborate events. We had sent a private plane down for him and back. He showed up, obviously big hit. And since then, we stay in touch. I've done his golf tournaments a couple times. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to speak with Joe, but he's Western Pennsylvania. I'm Northeastern Pennsylvania. He's grown up, what was he, Hungarian, I think was his background, me Polish side of it. It's just so easy. The conversations are so easy. So we become like pretty good buds, and that's how it all began. Chico, I want to see Namath at camp this year. And Bill Murray dropped a maybe on me. And that's how both of those things got rolling.
Joe, and you wore white spikes in high school as a football.
Of course.
Because of Joe Namath, correct?
Yeah, and I wore the bigger face mask, number 12, white Rydell's. And eventually when I got to Lafayette, my first drink of choice was scotch because that's what Joe drank. And I told him so.
Well,
he drank Johnny Walker.
Right.
I did Dewar's White Label.
Right.
So what?
Well, speaking of Rick Vaughn, our dear friend who helps Joe with PR and was PR guy with the Orioles, one of my best friends in the whole world. He told me that you play golf every day, like literally every day. Is that true?
Yeah.
And how are you getting any better? Because the last time I talked to you, you told me you stunk.
I do stink at times. I stunk yesterday. I played really well. I played well last weekend. I won my match. In the match play club championship. So I'm playing again tomorrow. I beat a really good golfer last Saturday. I can't believe Sunday came from behind. I'm down by 3 strokes after 12 and I win. So I bared down a little bit. Yes. Then I played again 2 days ago. It was great. I should have had a 78, 1 OB at the end, screwed me up. And then yesterday I stunk. I absolutely friggin' stunk. So today after we get done, going to the driving range because I stink with my driver. That's where I stink. And I'm playing a big match tomorrow, so I got to get the driver straight. So I'm going to go do that, go to the gym, get good rest tonight, and then I'm going to go out and play tomorrow and try to win. And if I win tomorrow, I play again on Sunday. I'm down like an 7-8 handicap kind of a guy.
Wow.
And, so it's listen, I have my moments. I even shot par once last summer at the Valley Country Club, which I've never been able to. I said once. Then the next day I was back to 85. It's just like that's the thing about this game. It's so wonderful. I need to. Yes, it's almost every day, but what I'm doing now because I'm coming off of back surgery last year. I had a laminectomy last year. So I'm trying to balance it out to not every day golf, maybe a day or two, gym, maybe a day off, golf. I'm trying to go like maybe 4 or 5 days a week at the most now.
Jeff, so typical of our baseball players who are such great athletes. I think at this game, he's a 7. He's an 8. He shot 78. That beats 99.9% of the people who've ever tried to play that diabolical game. So I don't want to hear it anymore, Joe.
Yeah, I study it. I'm watching videos this morning. I'm going over there. I'm going to the Chichi Rodriguez driving range in a couple of minutes to work on a couple things. Because if I get off the tee tomorrow, the local pro Anthony down at I'm a member of St. Pete Country Club now. He's helped me dramatically with my chipping and putting. Good. Off irons, good. I just bought some Mizunos. I love them, and I just got to get off the tee. And once I get off the tee, I'll be able to play consistently. High 70s, low 80s at the worst. I should be able to do that if I can get off the tee.
All right. Well, Joe, we could talk to you for hours, especially about spring training. We want to make sure we get you to the course because we need you to win tomorrow because we know how upset you'll be if you don't play well tomorrow. He's studying tapes, Jeff. He's almost 70 years old, and he's studying tapes of golf, his third best sport after baseball and football.
71 as of February 8th, by the way.
I was going to
buddy.
say, just turned 71. I
Sorry,
Just
Joe.
turned 71.
Sorry.
71 is a new 51. When I got my job with the Rays, I was 51. I said 51 was a new 31, so I'm staying with that mathematical equation. 71 is a new 51, and I'm sticking to it, brother.
Right. Well,
Joe Maddon, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for the patience with my dad's inability to technology. Let's just say Joe was ready to go, and we were still plugging things in when he was on the video, but...
Jeff,
Timing's perfect. It's right around 2 o'clock. I'm good.
Jeff,
There we go.
What you don't know is that one day we were doing a game in Chicago. Joe's the manager of the Cubs, and I'm having technological issues. And he takes my cell phone, and in front of all the press, he shows me how to do a function on it that everyone else in the world, the manager of the Cubs, was teaching me how to use my cell phone. Thank you for that too, Joe.
And I was honored. Thank you. Appreciate
Joe
it.
Maddon,
Thank
everybody.
you.
We'll have to have you as a repeat guest because I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours. Thank you, Joe,
Any
for being a
subject,
part of
any
the show.
subject you want. Any subject you want, guys. Thank you.
Thank you to Joe Maddon for joining us and a perfect guest for our spring training episode. Dad, I need to know, were you able to look up the Martin Luther King Jr. quote?
Yeah, it's not a great quote. I'm so embarrassed that I couldn't think of it at the time. But again, we were right about this. Joe Maddon was right. Carlos Pena, funny guy, tried to go from first to third in a base running drill and got thrown out. And he argued with Joe Maddon that maybe it wasn't a mistake, he said, and then he quoted the Martin Luther King freedom speech, and he said, in which Martin Luther King basically said, it's okay to go to prison if you are going there for the right reason. So he was going from first to third for the right reason. And even though he got thrown out, he should not be found guilty of that. He should not go to prison for that because his heart was in the right place on what he was trying to do. As Joe Maddon said, this is unbelievable. It's spring training, and my first baseman is quoting Dr. Martin Luther King.
That's incredible. Joe Maddon, thank you again for being our guest. To all of you listening, thank you so much for always being so loyal. Make sure to hit that follow button, subscribe on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you're listening. Make sure to download those episodes. It's completely free to you. And also follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on all the good stuff at Great Game or What. Dad, we'll see you in 2 weeks for our final off-season episode.
Can't wait to get back to once a week during the baseball season.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, thanks for being a part of our family.